Hello, everyone. We're back with Meet the Breeder today with Karlie. Her farm is Wildcat Run, and they're located in Kenna, West Virginia. Welcome, Karlie.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm excited today because we have a herd that is, in general, more focused on the homesteading aspect of having goats than the performance side. We've had a lot of really cool interviews with performance herds, and we've touched a little on cheese making and things like that. But today I'm really hoping to hear about how this herd specifically is utilizing their Nigerian dwarf goats for homesteading purposes. So why don't we start with just talking a little bit about how you got into Nigerians? Do you have any history with goats or livestock or anything like that? Kind of what your motives were when you first started getting into goats.
So I grew up in 4-H, but not really on a farm. And after getting married and moving to Houston, Texas, and then to Pittsburgh, we decided to move back to where we grew up, and we purchased vacant land. And eventually we built a house, and now we've started our homestead, and we pretty much built it from scratch. It had no home, no barn, no running water, no electricity. So we put everything in, and then after we had the setup ready, we added some farm animals, and goats were pretty much the first thing. We might have had a couple chickens before, but goats were high on the list because they're so versatile and you can get so much out of them. And they were economically a good decision for us. So I wanted to get registered goats because I wanted to know for sure what I was raising. I wanted to know their lineage, and I wanted to be able to look up their ancestors and see how they performed. And so we bought our first 2 does, and then a week later they offered us 2 more does, and so we bought those too. And from there it's just kind of grown, but that's kind of who we are and how we got started.
So do you mainly keep your herd size to whatever your family can utilize for milk? And do you eat any of your culls? I know that's very common on a lot of homesteading farms. If you have extra bucklings or a cull doe or whatever, that you actually will butcher and consume.
Yeah, so we have the knowledge to butcher our goats, but we use our land for hunting, and so most of our meat consumption is deer. We eat a lot of venison, and we also raise pork. Um, we have not butchered our own goats, but I do keep that in mind for future. And if we would need to, we definitely would. If we, ran into a situation where we needed to fill the freezer, then that would definitely be an option. And that is part of my selection. Is I like to keep and breed animals that maintain their weight well. Um, they don't easily lose weight, and they're not hard keepers. I like to keep a healthy herd that requires very minimal maintenance. I definitely select for goats that can produce milk, a lot of milk without having to have a lot of grain. And we try to do a lot of rotational grazing to help with meeting their nutritional needs.
I absolutely love all of that because, as you can see from people that have watched the other videos, your goals and what you're looking for in your does is very different from what a performance or a show herd is looking for, because that's not what your herd prioritizes. But there is some merit to having an udder that has a nice medial, has nice attachments, has a nice teat size for milking, that does cross over between the two different uses for the animals.
Yes, so I do select for a good conformation. That is overall good for the animal's health. They don't break down as quickly, and they just produce well with a good structure. So I find that the udders that I keep in my herd have easy to express teats. So, because I hand milk everything, and I have no interest in buying a milk machine at all. I enjoy milking, and I don't really want to give that up. It's something that I value. So I hand milk, and if it's not something, if it's not an animal that is easy to hand milk, then it doesn't get to stay, because I also value my time. So yeah, the attachments are important. because they help the udder produce for a longer period of time rather than an animal that, will be dragging the ground. That's not something that I can keep in my herd either. So I find that the udder conformation is pretty important for a homestead because you're not putting the extra care, or you give care, but not the extra maintenance that maybe a show herd would give, because mine is for personal use, and so I do trim the udders and to keep the hair out of the milk, but it's not necessarily something that is going to be shown off in a show ring.
Do you milk year round then, or do you have a period where you do have dry does?
I do have a period that I have dry does. I dam raise the kids and I milk once a day. And because of that, I keep a couple does in milk most of the year. There's a period in the fall where pretty much everyone is dried up. But this year I'd like to actually try kidding in the fall. I haven't done that yet. And I think that would be beneficial to our setup. So I'm hopefully going to be breeding a couple does pretty shortly for kidding in the fall. But yeah, I have does in milk pretty much most of the year, and I keep more than one in milk usually when I can, and keep a kid on her most of the time also.
Do you keep your own breeding bucks on the property as well?
I do. I have 4 right now, and 11 does, and I just like having the ability to choose and purchase what I think will do well. Relying on someone else and renting a buck wouldn't work well for me because there aren't a lot of registered herds in my area. It's getting more popular, but I'm very picky about what I bring into the herd, and so I just like to have what I want and then be able to use them whenever I need to.
What types of things does your family enjoy that you guys do with the milk?
Well, we make cheese and ice cream, and I recently got a cream separator, so I'm going to be trying butter. I haven't had a chance to do it yet, but I look forward to it. And we drink the milk. We like to use it in our coffee and our tea, and mostly just everything that we would use a regular cow's milk for that you buy at the store.
Do you sell any milk or any milk products, or is that not allowed in your area?
So our state is new to having herd shares. You aren't allowed to sell milk without a herd share, and I am not interested in really doing all the paperwork that's required for that. So I will share my milk with visitors, but it's mostly for our consumption, my family's consumption.
Okay. Would you be interested in showing us your does or your farm and giving us a little tour?
Yes, absolutely. Right now, most of the does are out grazing. I have a couple in the barn with young kids, and then the does that are a little older, or the does that have older kids, are out in the field.
In your area, because it sounds like the Nigerians are on the rise a little bit, is it pretty easy to sell your extra kids?
It is. Actually, ever since COVID hit, we have seen a huge increase in interest in the Nigerian dwarf breed, and goats in general. And yeah, there are people all over our area looking to get into goats. I'm kind of cautious about how quickly I am to sell them, but yeah, I sold all that I wanted to for this year, and I plan to keep the rest.
Nice. Well, it's good to know that the market's pretty strong all over. I mean, the breed is such a nice breed to have. Up here in Wisconsin, same thing, where everyone's sold out.
Yeah.
Whether it's for pets or milking does are like impossible to get your hands on. Doe kids. Yeah. Well, for me, I only had 3 born, so they're all staying this year. But yeah, it seems like on top of the whole COVID, homesteading kind of thing, there's definitely been a buck year for a lot of people, at least up here. So not a lot of does to be had if people want to get into the milking and the breeding and all that.
Yeah, it seems like people are just a lot more interested now in food security all the way around.
Yeah,
And so
I agree.
I think for people to have an option, to have meat and also milk, it's a very good market. So I'm in the field. Hold on. I don't know how to turn the camera around. I see it. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
There's a couple of our girls. 2 of those are actually expecting for May. One of them is dry. And then this is my main milker here. Her name is Oreo. And she has been in milk since January, beginning of January. So, and then this is her daughter back here, a yearling. And then the gold one is her daughter, who's a 3-year-old. And we have a couple more does over there.
What type of production are you looking for out of your does? Are you looking for that long level lactation? Are you looking for high volume? Do you do any testing or anything to check butter fat? Or is it just kind of whoever's producing whatever you need at the time works for you?
Yeah, I have not done milk testing yet. I haven't. I have tried to get into a 1-day milk test, but they're kind of hard to find in my area. So I would like to have numbers on how well they're producing, but mostly I look for a doe that will stay in milking once a day, and she has to make it worth my time. So if she starts to dry off before I'm ready for her to dry off, which would be, I would not want her to dry off before 6 or 7 months into the lactation, then it would be something to consider whether or not to keep her in the herd. But I like to be able to get about a quart on once a day milking.
Per doe?
Yeah.
Or your whole per doe? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely worth your time, right?
Right. Yeah. No, that provides all that we need for our family. And so that's, and more than what we need really, but it's definitely usable because we can also feed it to the pigs, and we, can share some with the dogs, but for ourselves, it makes it worth our time.
Okay, without getting into a big debate, because I know there's a lot of people with different philosophies on this, for homesteading purposes, and the reason I'm asking this is because for showing, you don't have an option to disbud your goats. You have to. For homesteading, you can choose to do whatever you like. You can buy polled genetics, you can disbud, you can dehorn. Do you have a preference and why?
Yes, I disbud all of the goats that are born on our farm, and I do that mostly because I have to be able to manage the goats. I have to bring them to different pastures. I have to put them on the milk stand and train them to milk. And and my kids also do that. So I just think it's safer for my kids and myself to have goats without horns. And I know that I'm going to take extra care of the goats without horns because they can't fend for themselves and they can't defend themselves against a predator. But I find that they're much more easily managed, and they don't get this attitude that they have horns. They don't get an attitude with each other, and they don't get an attitude with me. So that's why I prefer to have all of the goats with no horns.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought it would be interesting to ask you because you're in a situation where, you don't have to disbud, where a lot of people who want to show, maybe they wouldn't disbud if they didn't have to. I think that's why a lot of people like the polled genetics, because then it's not even in their hands.
Right.
Okay. So if I'm a new family that wants to get more into the food security, wants to be more self-sufficient, what would you tell people if they start on the journey of wanting to get into dairy goats? Do you have some pointers?
I would suggest finding a breeder that has the same goals as you. And I would suggest, asking a lot of questions up front, and then also starting out small. it's, it grows pretty quickly. So if you start out small, you can get the hang of all the maintenance things and what works for your herd and what's going to be the best for their health and for your production. So I just think starting out small is definitely a positive thing to do for your herd. And people who don't have goats, a lot of times don't realize just different maintenance needs that goats have. They don't realize that their hooves need trim. They don't realize that they need minerals, and that the minerals in your area aren't the same as all the other areas in the United States. So if you start small, you can kind of pay closer attention to the animals that you have, and you can see what their needs are, and then you can tweak your program to make it more beneficial for you. Whereas if you start out with a herd of 10 or more, you're not going to be able to pay quite as much attention to their individual needs.
I think that's a great point too, because I keep a pretty small herd, and just by having a small amount of animals, it's usually under 10, you see if somebody's acting off, if they're not eating right. If you have a herd of 50 or 100 goats, it's much harder to go goat by goat to see if somebody's kind of acting off a little bit. You don't know their personalities probably as well. What's normal for one goat isn't normal for another goat. So I think that's a really good point. You need 2 goats. So
Yes.
if you're new to goats, you have to have 2 or more, or something similar to 2 goats. But I think that's a wonderful starting point, either a wether and a doe, or even start with 2 wethers and just see if you even like having goats on the property, if they're fun for you, figuring out all the maintenance and the fencing and the minerals and all that.
Yes.
I tell people, I think once you know how to properly care for them, I feel like they're easier than a dog.
Yeah, you know what to look for after you get the hang of it, but it can be really overwhelming if you get into it and then have some emergency come up and you're not prepared and you don't, have the tools that you need on hand. It can be really overwhelming, and then a lot of people sell out. And I just think starting out small would save a lot of heartache and a lot of headache for many folks.
I agree. That's wonderful advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think you threw out a lot of great points, and it was really nice to approach raising goats from a little different angle today. So thank you for sharing your homestead with us. And we really appreciate you jumping on. Do you have a website or a Facebook page that you'd like to share in case anyone would like to reach out to you?
Oh yeah, we are on Facebook. Our farm page is Wildcat Run.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.
All right, thanks. Bye.